Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, the question that I will be answering is, who are the Gentiles in Luke chapter 21, verse 24? So, Luke chapter 21, verse 24 reads, "And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled." So there are two kinds of Gentiles. There's the physical Gentile and there is the spiritual Gentile. In ancient Israel, the idea of being a Gentile was a very physical thing. It was somebody who was not circumcised. They were not of the fold or stock of Israel. They were not descendants of Abraham. For example, the Greeks in those days were Gentiles because they did not partake of the physical circumcision of the Jews, which was the definition of what it meant to be a Jew, according to Genesis chapter 17, verses 7 to 14, that all of Abraham's descendants would be circumcised. So anyone who wasn't circumcised wasn't a descendant of Abraham, and in that manner was not a Jew, was not of the fold or people of God. So based on this definition, we can now go into a little bit of history. When Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed in AD 70 by the Romans, who were Gentiles, the Jewish diaspora took place. And this is what is meant by, "and shall be led captive into all nations," in Luke chapter 21, verse 24. And for a major part of Christian history, the Jews were never able to create a kingdom or nation or really have any power. They were completely oppressed and suppressed by the Gentile nations in or under which they lived. But with the two world wars, the era of the Gentile kings and queens ended because their autocracy collapsed, and that's what led to democracy that humans often celebrate today. And in 1948, Israel became a nation officially. Symbolically, the Gentile times ended. Now, this was not by their own power. It was the hand of God that made them able to defeat the much more powerful Arabs and become a state as they were initially. And this was in fulfillment of Luke chapter 21, verse 24. The end of the Gentile times. The end of the time when Israel didn't have a nation and they were in Gentile nations. Now they have a nation of their own. Everything I've said so far, though, is just talking about the physical Gentiles and the physical Jews. We're now going to look at it differently. Since Jesus Christ came down and paid the ransom for the whole world, according to Matthew chapter 20, verse 28, and the new covenant began, physical circumcision was no longer needed. And this was what St. Paul said: "Circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing, but the keeping of the commandments of God," according to 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 19. Therefore, the idea of a Jew and a Gentile was redefined to not consider some of those physical properties or qualifications. And St. Paul explained this redefinition in Romans chapter 2, verses 28 and 29, where he said, "For he is not a Jew which is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision which is outward in the flesh, but he is a Jew which is one inwardly. And circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit, and not in the letter, whose praise is not of men, but of God." Based on this definition, those who believe and love the things of the world can be considered Gentiles before God, because they have not circumcised their hearts to walk in line with the ways of God, according to Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 16, and Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 4. Since the beginning of this world, those who did not believe in God prospered. There were mighty kings and lords, both in Christianity and Judaism and outside, who blasphemed the name of God and often still prospered when doing so. Satan had his empires which ruled the world, which were mentioned in Revelation chapter 17, verses 10 to 11. That is to say, the seven kings, starting from Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Media and Persia, Greece, the Roman Empire, and the last of the seven was the British Empire. Now, these are not the only powerful empires that have ever ruled the world, but those are the seven kings in Revelation chapter 17, because those seven, at some point in their history, had some kind of dealing with the people of God. Like with Egypt, there's the obvious, Israel was under Egyptian bondage for 400 years. The books of Esther and so on talk about Israel's relationship with Media and Persia. Greece and Rome were during the time of Christ and a little bit before and after. Assyria the books of the Kings talk a lot about that, and even the British Empire having to do with Israel in the modern times and so on. So, but anyhow, all of these nations, they just kind of symbolize or represent the entirety of Satan's empire. And that was the empire that Satan was talking about in Matthew chapter 4, verse 8, that all these things will I give thee, right? All of these kingdoms. So that is a Gentile system that is now being conquered in our time today with the gradual weakening of political force. So that now, unlike before where monarchs really had complete power, today's version of the monarchs, who we call presidents, prime ministers, and so on, they don't have that kind of power. They do have power, but they don't have nearly as much, because now people can freely say whatever they want about them, and there are no consequences. Sometimes they can be disobeyed, and a time is coming that their power will be even less, so that, as the Bible says, all our princes will become nothing. If you read Isaiah chapter 34, verse 12, and people will begin to see leadership as a very unserious thing, because there'll be no power in it. So this is the Gentile times and how they would end, and how the people of God, both the Jews in the literal sense and the actual righteous people in the real sense, will be liberated from the clutches of Satan so that we can be free and the desire of all nations would fulfill, according to Haggai chapter 2, verses 6 to 7. So that is how the Gentiles in Luke chapter 21, verse 24 are. That's what they mean, and how that prophecy is fulfilling in our time. Thank you for watching this video. If you learned something from it, then I'd appreciate it if you click the like button and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to know when we come back with future videos, you can click the notification bell. Thank you, and I'll see you in tomorrow's video.